Look, there's Johnson in the background. Oh my, another one of the loves of my life, since I've talked about that a bit. So senior year of high school was also very meaningful to me. Theater was an important part of that. I want to say that it was senior year of high school, maybe junior year. I'm not, or maybe just the first year out of high school. I can't remember, that the movie The Exorcist came out. And I remember this because I think I've said this many, many times, but I was born to be a designated driver. I never was a drinker, never took to alcohol. To this day, I haven't had a full beer in my life. Just don't care for the taste. And, I'll have a cocktail very infrequently. And in Italy, I'll drink a little wine, but it's always very little. But I was just born to be a designated driver. As a result, I think all my friends just became alcoholics because they had me to drive. And I remember we'd go to White Sox games on the South Side, and it was just an excuse for my friends to drink as much as they possibly could. Dan could drink, and John Baldoff, a good friend of mine, could drink. And I remember we drove down, I'm going to get back to The Exorcist. We drive down to White Sox Park, and just so they could drink and drink and drink, they were the guys you'd see in the stands who would be stacking cups by the end of the game. And we'd drive home from there, and they'd be shit-faced. And it never bothered me. I always just enjoyed being with them. And maybe that led to Nick, primarily, when you were young, and all of you, when I said, if you're going to go out and party, that's fine, just don't ever drink and drive. And why I loved picking you up, even when Jeremy would be puking in the back, out the door, we'd have to stop so Jeremy could puke. It reminded me, I think, of when I was younger, just driving my friends around drunk. So it never bothered me that they drank and I didn't, and I seemed to fit in okay. So The Exorcist was this movie that came out of this girl who gets possessed. Maybe you've seen it. It was kind of a classic movie at the time. But when it first came out, it was a phenomenon. And you'd read stories about people running out of the theater and freaking out. And I mean, you see it now, and it's goofy because there's been so many things since, influenced, I would say, by The Exorcist. And we went down to the Gateway Theater. It was the only place that was playing in Chicago. I think it was called the Gateway. And I drove, and we went and saw The Exorcist, and sure enough, people were running out of the theater, and people were screaming in the theater. It was just kind of this mass hysteria that had taken hold. And I think it was that night that we drove home. I drove, of course, because they were like drinking and whatever. And we'd come home, and we'd be mooning out the window and doing just stupid shit, and I was driving. And I remember I tried mooning, and Dan drove this little MG one time, and there was a little jagged metal, and I cut my ass when I was trying to moon. So many stories keep coming back, and then I'm afraid I'm going to forget them. I did direct Under Milkwood 4 times. This goes back to a video that I watched, and I said I couldn't remember if I'd done it 3 or 4 times. I ended up also directing, and I had mentioned before, at Trollwood summer music camp, or whatever it was called, up in Fargo, one of the summers when we were staying up at the farm, and Mom and me early on were commuting over to Fargo to work at this outdoor theater, and I worked and did Under Milkwood. Let's see. So senior year, probably one of the biggest things. Well, my first girlfriend, I was together with Julie, and that was really meaningful. We didn't have sex, I don't think. Maybe tried towards the end of our relationship, but I was just naive. And the play my senior year, the contest play, again, remember that was important, was Cyrano de Bergerac. Gary had not graduated at the end of his senior year, which would have been 1973. This was 1974. And he came up a little short in his credits. And so he was thinking about just dropping out completely. And I remember sitting with him across the street at the end of our junior year, maybe the summer or whatever, from the high school. And I remember he was smoking a cigarette. And because Gary was high like every day in high school, he was always stoned. Immensely, immensely talented. And I remember I kind of talked him into staying in school. And he ended up coming back for one more semester and to be in our contest play, which was Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, we had done the full stage production, which you have to be in theater to appreciate doing Cyrano de Bergerac as a high school. And further, Barbara Greener Patterson, who directed it, she decided to cast Gary Sinise and Bob Lovitz, who I've talked about, this wunderkind, in the roles of Cyrano and the other male lead, Chris John. And then on opposite weekends, they flipped roles in high school. And these are not small roles. Cyrano de Bergerac, I did it at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, and Phil Johnson played Cyrano, and it's one of the longest amount of lines you could ever learn. And they learned both parts and flipped it in high school. I was the first cast member in that cast, if I'm not mistaken, to be not double cast. I was the same character in both. I played a character named Lebray. Lebray was the best friend to Cyrano, and so I got to do it both with Gary and with Jeff. Not Jeff, excuse me, with Gary and Bob. Bob ended up going on to Juilliard. He was in the acting company. He was an immensely talented guy and had a career ahead of him for sure in theater and film. And after about 5 years working with the acting company, directed by a guy named John Houseman, who's in American theater history is a significant name, Bob chucked it all and decided to go back to medical school. And he went back to medical school to become an anesthesiologist. And he lives in Portland now. I saw him a few years ago, and we chat every once in a while. Bob was 1 year younger than me. But imagine, he had this career, and he chucked it and became a doctor. A really amazing story. And he does some community theater up in Portland now because he just loves the act of doing theater, but he was not into the business of theater at all, which is very telling and very noble, and he's had a wonderful career, and he's as nice a guy as you could ever possibly meet. So we did Cyrano, and I remember, again, at the end, the joy we felt being a part of this. I remember at the end of the play, when Gary was Cyrano, him walking out, this was at the height of our friendship, him walking out and us exchanging eye contact and just tears in our eyes and feeling full emotion about what we were able to do. I don't know if we saw it on the big picture or not, but it was just such a beautiful, wonderful thing. Cyrano has one of my favorite lines, and Cyrano says, "There comes one moment once, and heaven help those who pass that moment by." And that line's always stuck with me. I think Gary highlighted that line first, and Gary was a big influence on me, I have to admit. I emulated him many, many times. Bob was a great guy too, and we had that emotion. But Gary and I were super tight. We'd get stoned together. We'd go to Virginia's and eat in Highwood. It's now called Sandy's, and it's run by her daughter. Sandy worked there as a waitress when Gary and I used to go there, and it was a great place. And then there was a Italian beef place called Ono's where we'd go. And Gary, for whatever reason, never had money, and always would say, "May," and he always talked like that, "May, go buy me an Italian beef," And we'd go to Ono's. Generally, we'd probably be high sometimes, and we'd always go in there, and Irv was the guy who ran the place. He owned the place, and we'd say 2 Italian beefs, and he'd always say, peckers on your beef was just this running stupid joke. But wonderful times. Cyrano was just a magical play. It's remains one of my favorite plays to this day. Beautiful, beautiful language and so much fun. What else did we do senior year? Oh, then we ended up taking the play to contest, and we only did the fifth act. It was a 5-act play. We only did the fifth act of the play, and Barbara wrote an introduction to kind of set up what we were doing, and I was the one who got to do it. I remember what I said. It was like, "Hi, I'm an actor preparing to perform the role of Lebray in a cutting from a play by Edmond Rostand called Cyrano de Bergerac. In the French theater of Cyrano's time, candles lit the stage." And it was this thing she had written. We didn't do very well with Cyrano, unfortunately. I don't know. I hope it wasn't because of my introduction. But we had done so well with Under Milkwood and then Caucasian Chalk Circle. And sorry about all the theater, but theater was just so vital, and the camaraderie I felt was so vital to me at that time in my life. So we went to contest. I don't think we did very well. And Gary and I both graduated early. He didn't graduate early. He graduated a semester late. And I graduated early because I had always taken chorus. So I didn't have to really go to class my second semester of my senior year because I had enough credits. And that's where I'll cut it off for right now. Bye. Today is December 19th, 20th, 2025. And I'm going to get ready for a Santa gig here in a couple moments. So, Merry Christmas.